The first day in my new home was supposed to feel like a fresh start, but instead it turned into a nightmare. Within hours of unloading boxes, flashing red and blue lights cut across the cul-de-sac like a crime scene. My so-called neighbor known around the block as HOA Karen had called the police, accusing me of trespassing on my own property. But she had no idea that her little stunt would spark a chain of events she could never control. By the time it was over, she wouldn't just lose the battle, she would lose access to the one thing she valued most, her own driveway. When I bought my new home in a gated community, I imagined peace, order, and a quiet life away from the chaos of the city. The neighborhood was designed to look like perfection. Manicured lawns, identical white fences, and neighbors who waved as you drove past. On the surface, it was the kind of place that promised stability and safety. But beneath the clean sidewalks and strict HOA rules, there was something suffocating, an invisible weight pressing on every homeowner. Everyone seemed to know there were unwritten rules enforced not with kindness or fairness, but with fear of fines, threats, and humiliation. At the center of it all was Margaret, though everyone just called her Karen. She wasn't officially the president of the HOA, but she behaved as if she owned the entire neighborhood. People whispered about how she spent her days walking the sidewalks, clipboard in hand, jotting down notes on any lawn that looked a little too wild, any trash bin left out too long, any car parked half an inch over a painted line. The stories about her weren't just rumors. Families who had lived there for years described her as the eyes and ears of the HOA. If you broke a rule, she would be the first to report you. If you tried to push back, she would find another rule, another angle, another way to make you regret it. I moved in a week earlier than expected, something perfectly legal under my purchase contract. But in Karen's mind, my early arrival was an act of defiance. To her, I had broken the natural order of the community. On my first morning, as I carried boxes from the moving truck into the garage, I noticed her standing at the end of her driveway. Arms crossed, eyes narrowed, lips pursed in disapproval. She didn't wave. She didn't welcome me. She simply stood there like a sentry, as if waiting for me to make a mistake. By afternoon, she had already introduced herself in the most condescending way possible. "You should know," she said flatly, "we take our rules very seriously. Here, people who don't follow them don't last long." Then she handed me a copy of the HOA guidelines, thick as a dictionary, with sections highlighted in neon yellow. At first, I brushed it off. After all, I had dealt with strict HOAs before. But something about her demeanor unsettled me. It wasn't just about rules, it was about power. She thrived on making others feel small, trapped, and powerless. And then came the day she decided to escalate. It started small, as most HOA battles do. A letter in my mailbox, unsigned but stamped with the HOA seal, informing me that moving in before the official occupancy date was a violation. I knew that wasn't true. My realtor had explained everything, and the closing paperwork gave me full rights to the property. Still, the letter demanded a $250 fine. I ignored it. 2 days later, another letter arrived, this one warning of additional penalties and consequences if I didn't comply. The tone wasn't just stern, it was threatening. It claimed the HOA reserved the right to escalate matters to law enforcement if necessary. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a fine, it was about intimidation. And I could see Karen's hand all over it. Sure enough, on the third day, she made her move. I was hauling a box of tools into the garage when 2 police cars pulled up in front of my house, lights flashing. My stomach sank, not because I thought I had done anything wrong, but because I knew exactly who was behind it. The officers approached, asking me to explain why I was on the property. Karen appeared out of nowhere, waving her clipboard, insisting that I was squatting illegally. She demanded that they remove me immediately. The humiliation of having neighbors peek through their blinds, watching this scene unfold, burned in my chest. I showed the officers my deed and closing documents. After a tense half hour, they confirmed everything was legal and left. But Karen didn't look embarrassed. She looked angry, furious that her stunt hadn't worked. That was only the beginning. She reported my garbage bins for being visible from the street. She sent notices about the length of my grass, even though I had hired landscapers. She filed a complaint that my moving truck had damaged the curb. Each notice came with a fine, each fine grew steeper, and each time I fought back with documentation, emails, and receipts. The process was exhausting, but I refused to back down. Then I discovered something that changed everything. While reviewing my property survey documents, I noticed that the boundary line between my driveway and Karen's wasn't where she thought it was. In fact, her driveway slightly overlapped onto my land. It was only a few feet, but it meant her car technically crossed my property every time she parked. It wasn't something most people would notice, but it was ironclad on paper. And in a neighborhood where every inch of property lines mattered, this was a weapon she couldn't fight. I spoke to an attorney, who confirmed my suspicion. If I wanted, I could legally restrict her access. Karen, who had built her entire identity around control, had made one fatal mistake. She had failed to realize her power was built on shaky ground. So I prepared my move carefully, waiting for the perfect moment. The HOA scheduled a community board meeting to address ongoing violations at my property. Of course, Karen was front and center, standing at the podium like a prosecutor ready to deliver her case. She went down a list of complaints: trash bins, grass length, unauthorized move-in date. Each accusation was laced with venom, and each time she spoke, she cast sidelong glances at me as if daring me to crumble in front of everyone. When the board finally allowed me to speak, I stood calmly, a folder of documents in my hand. I addressed each accusation with receipts, emails, and photographs. The board members grew uncomfortable, realizing her claims were baseless. And then, with deliberate precision, I pulled out the property survey. I laid it on the table for everyone to see. The boundary lines were clear, the signatures official. Karen's driveway wasn't fully on her property, it encroached on mine. The room fell silent. Even the board members, who usually cowered under her influence, shifted in their seats, unsure of what to say. Then I delivered the final blow. I informed them that I would be filing paperwork to install a fence and landscaping along my property, lined directly across the sliver of land her driveway crossed. In other words, I had the legal right to block her driveway completely. Karen's face turned red. Her voice cracked as she shouted that it wasn't fair, that I couldn't possibly do this. But the board, already embarrassed by her failed accusations, had no ground to support her. For once, the power shifted. She had tried to weaponize rules and control, but now she was the one trapped by boundaries she couldn't bend. In the weeks that followed, I moved forward with my plan. I filed the paperwork, hired contractors, and watched as the line of fencing slowly rose, cutting across the edge of her driveway. Every day, she stood outside, fuming, helpless to stop. By the time it was finished, her once pristine driveway had been reduced to half its original size. She could no longer park her SUV without it spilling into the street. Delivery trucks struggled to maneuver around her property. Guests had to park blocks away. The irony was undeniable. She had spent years enforcing rules to make others' lives miserable, and now the rules themselves had turned against her. Neighbors who once feared her started whispering behind her back. Some even smiled at me, quietly grateful that someone had finally stood up to her. She had built her power on intimidation, but without fear, she was nothing. For me, the victory wasn't just about the driveway. It was about proving that bullies, no matter how powerful they seem, always overreach eventually. Her attempt to destroy my peace had only destroyed her own, and as I stood at my window, sipping coffee, watching her struggle to back out of her shrunken driveway, I couldn't help but wonder, how many other communities suffer under people like her? How many families stay silent, afraid to fight back? Sometimes the only way to end a tyrant's reign is to use the very rules they abuse against them.